Hello and welcome to Baiju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this editorial from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. This article deals with the topic of sedition. Recently in Andhra Pradesh, the state police arrested an MP just because he criticized the state chief minister, and he has been arrested on the charges of sedition, which has been covered under the provisions of Section 124A of the Indian Penal Code. In this context, the editorial evaluates whether the provision of sedition is being misused by governments and by the police forces, and it goes on to evaluate the constitutionality of this provision by checking whether it violates the fundamental right to free speech and expression, which has been guaranteed under Article 19, Clause 1, Subclause A. See, there have been numerous instances where the provisions of sedition has been invoked by several governments and by several police forces in an attempt to curb free speech and to target those who dissent against the government and those who criticize against the government. And the police forces readily go to the extent of arresting the individuals. And this highlights the controversial nature of this law. See, the definition of sedition is that any conduct or any speech which has the potential to incite violence and incite a rebellion against the state or the authority. So, in short, it is branded as an anti-national activity that is targeted against the government that is in power. This provision has been contained under Section 124A of the IPC, and it is essentially a colonial era law that was introduced by the British to primarily target political writings and speeches of our freedom fighters, which was inspiring India's freedom struggle. So, by seeing for what purpose the colonial government was using this law, we can clearly say that the concept of sedition at its very core is undemocratic in nature. Because treating any speech or conduct as anti-national and as against the government undermines the rights of the citizens to speak freely and raise their voices against the government in order to expose its shortcomings. So it's highly unfortunate that this colonial era legislation, which is often considered as draconian, has been included in our law books even post-independence. So in post-independent India, the provision of sedition has been retained in our law books. And if the colonial government was using this law to target the freedom fighters and their speeches and writings, in post-independent India, our governments and our police forces have been using this draconian provision to target free speech and expression and to target those who dissent against the government and those who criticize the government, especially those who are critical against top leaders of the ruling parties. This controversial law states that those who incite hatred and contempt and those who excite disaffection against the state through their words, either spoken or written, or through signs or through visible representation, they shall be punished with a maximum term of life imprisonment and with a minimum sentence of 3 years in jail with a fine. So such harsh penalties have been provided under this law, and even a basic observation makes it very clear that this provision of sedition has not been well defined, and it provides for a very vague, discrete definition, thus creating enough scope for the law enforcement authorities to provide for a broad application of this law. And in most cases, the ruling parties and the police forces, they apply their discretion while applying this law, and the provision has been conveniently misused to target free speech and writings which are critical of the government, and often it leads to the labeling of such dissent and criticism as anti-national activity. Essentially, under this law, those who criticize the prime minister or the chief ministers or other top leaders, they get labeled as anti-nationals. And according to the editorial, this is clearly undemocratic as it stifles the right to free speech and expression, which is a guaranteed fundamental right under the Constitution. However, the Supreme Court in 1962, through the Kedarnath Singh case, had upheld the constitutionality of sedition, and hence civil society activists and legal experts have been urging the judiciary since several years to re-examine the constitutionality of this law. In fact, currently, the Supreme Court is looking at one such petition which questions the constitutionality of sedition, because if you look at modern democracies around the world, they usually do not provide any space for such draconian laws. By citing several examples, the editorial points out that the provision of sedition has been invoked by the police just on the basis of someone's speech and writings. The police bureaucracy and the civil servants haven't cared much to examine whether these speeches and writings posed an imminent threat to public order, or did these speeches and writings actually incite violence on the ground. If this test fails, then clearly there is no ground for invoking the sedition law, but still the police forces have blatantly misused the provision to invoke sedition against any speech or writing which hasn't necessarily been an imminent threat to public order and which hasn't exactly incited any actual violence on the ground. So, in this context, the editorial remarks that it is high time for the judiciary to re examine the constitutionality of sedition, and in the meantime, the centre should take upon itself the responsibility to defend free speech and expression under Article 19 by abolishing sedition from the law books. Next, on page number 11, the Hindu analyzes whether India's policy towards the Israel Palestine issue is evolving. See, for several decades, India has maintained a consistent position over the Israel Palestine issue. But of late, there have been some developments in India's foreign policy which indicates that India's policy towards this issue might be evolving by retaining few core principles and traditional principles while introducing few changes in order to strike a better balance between Israel and Palestine. See, last week, when the latest round of clashes broke out between Israel and Palestine, we had discussed the background to this issue in complete detail. We spoke about the root cause of the Israel Palestine conflict that dates all the way back to 1947, and we had even discussed the latest trigger which has led to the ongoing clashes between Israeli Defense Forces and the Hamas militant group that operates out of the Gaza Strip. For this background and analysis, you can go back and watch our video for the 12th of May. And as a follow up to this discussion, we are analyzing whether India's policy towards this issue is evolving. See, India's traditional position on the Israel Palestine issue has been that we strongly support the UN two state solution that was proposed in 1947, which essentially provided for the creation of two independent states. That is, one state known as Israel for Jews and another state known as Palestine for the Arabs. As per this UN two state solution, these two independent countries were supposed to be born that would coexist peacefully side by side with clearly recognized borders. But contrary to this position taken by the UN, which was supported by a majority of the countries, Israel unilaterally declared independence on its own in 1948, and it preempted the creation of Palestine. And since then, Israel has been expanding its territory while continuously occupying Palestinian territories. Apart from that, Israel's aggressive policies has led to the oppression of Palestinians and their rights. And in retaliation, few radical Arabs have set up militant organizations such as the Hamas, which is known to carrying out random acts of violence to target Israel. And to any such act of violence from Hamas, Israel responds with disproportionate force, without even hesitating to target Palestinian civilians. So, on this complex issue, India has maintained a principled stand for many decades. And as per this policy, India has consistently supported the UN two state solution. And even today, India gives complete diplomatic support to the creation of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital and with clearly recognized borders so that Palestine can be set up as an independent, sovereign, viable nation that can coexist peacefully side by side with the Jewish state of Israel. So, over the years, whenever India has expressed a position on the issue, it has always stated firm support to the two state solution, calling for the creation of Palestine. And in these statements, India has always mentioned that East Jerusalem, where the latest clashes and violence were reported, should be the capital of Palestine with clearly recognized borders. This traditional position of India has been reiterated by subsequent governments. And in 2013, this position was reiterated by then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and as well as in 2015 by President Pranab Mukherjee. This traditional policy of India was a result of its independent foreign policy, which was designed to protect its core national interests. But however, this also meant that India was getting divided between Arab countries and Israel. And for several decades, India was forced to side with the Arab countries, even at the cost of affecting its ties with Israel. See, in 1948, when Israel unilaterally declared independence, it was in violation of international law, and hence correctly, India had not recognized Israel. And in fact, even prior to this, India had opposed the communal partition of the region, as India itself was a victim of one such communal partition. But later, as this became the only viable solution, India gave firm support to the two-state theory of UN, but Israel openly violated this with the support of US and UK, and it went on to declare independence unilaterally while snatching away the rights of Palestinians. So based on these developments, India took a principled approach to give complete support and backing for the creation of Palestine as an independent state. But later, after India started recognizing Israel from 1950 onwards, India would have wanted to cultivate ties with Israel as well, in line with its independent foreign policy. But unfortunately, India wasn't allowed for few years to strike this balance between Israel and the Palestinian cause, because India fell under the pressure of the Arab countries which had declared war against Israel in support of Palestine. So as a result, from 1950 to 1992, India could not officially establish ties with Israel, and India had to side with the Arab countries as it was heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil. Plus, India was also concerned about the well being of its large diaspora residing in the Arab nations. These external factors, along with the compulsions of domestic politics, pushed India to not establish diplomatic ties with Israel for several decades. And even after India established diplomatic relations in 1992, it has been a very cautious relationship. But at the same time, whenever Israel was using disproportionate force against civilians in Palestine, and whenever Israel was violating Palestinian rights, India did take a principled stand. And India was often found to be criticizing Israel for using disproportionate force. And at the UN Human Rights Council, whenever Israel was targeted for war crimes, there are instances where India voted against Israel in the interest of genuinely protecting the human rights of Palestinians. But this traditional policy of India did have a few shortcomings, even though it remained firmly committed to the creation of Palestine. The shortcoming was that, under the pressure of the Arab countries, India was forced to affect its policies and relations with Israel, which was also against Indian interests, considering how important Israel is for India's security and defense needs. But from 2017-18 onwards, there has been a subtle change introduced in India's policy towards this issue. And under Prime Minister Modi, we have been witnessing this policy evolve to better fine tune our balance between Israel and the Palestinian cause. See, as discussed, India's earlier position was that we are firmly committed to the two-state solution and we give complete backing for the creation of Palestine. And India would also mention every time that East Jerusalem should be the capital of the independent state of Palestine with clearly recognized borders. But now, a subtle change has been introduced in India's foreign policy, wherein India continues its full support for the two-state solution and for the creation of Palestine, but it has started excluding the reference to East Jerusalem, and it also doesn't make any mention of recognized borders. Experts believe that this change has been introduced because these specific matters are minor issues, because the capital of Palestine and the exact boundaries can be determined later through negotiations between the conflicting parties. But the key focus and priority as of now is the creation of Palestine as an independent nation. So, in line with India's principled approach, a core element of India's traditional policy has been retained, which is India's complete support for the creation of Palestine and for the protection of Palestinian rights. But at the same time, subtle changes have been introduced to exclude minor issues, which will give India more space to navigate this complex issue and strike a balance in its relations with Israel. Now, coming to the latest developments, we need to talk about the recent clashes that broke out in the region and the current position that India has taken at the UN Security Council. Last week, we have discussed how the latest crisis erupted and as to what events triggered violence in East Jerusalem, which eventually led to fighting between Israel and Hamas. So, at the UN Security Council, this issue has been debated upon, and India, as a non permanent member, was obviously expected to express its position. During this debate at the UN Security Council, India's permanent representative to the UN, T.S. Tirumurthy, has clearly expressed India's opinion and stand on the issue. It's very important to note that India has condemned all forms of violence, and specifically, India has pointed out that during the latest incident, violence began in East Jerusalem. That is essentially the trigger was the attack on the sacred Al Aqsa Mosque, which was carried out by Israeli security forces during the holy month of Ramzan. We have discussed on the 12th of May as well as to how Israeli security forces were preventing Palestinians from praying at the Al Aqsa Mosque, which happens to be the third holiest site in Islam. It was this unnecessary provocation in East Jerusalem carried out by Israel which led to protests by the Palestinians. Then, by citing these protests, Israeli security forces carried out a raid in the Al Aqsa Mosque, leading to massive violence at the sacred site. And it was this act of violence that Israel committed against those who were praying at the mosque, which motivated Hamas to launch its rocket attacks against Israel in retaliation. So, after Hamas mounted these rocket attacks from Gaza Strip against Israeli civilian population, Israel said it had a right to defend itself and launched massive airstrikes and military operations against Hamas. And during these military operations in the Gaza Strip, hundreds of innocent Palestinian civilians have been killed, injured, and affected. But Israel has continued to ignore these sufferings, and it continues to maintain a stand that it was Hamas which triggered the conflict by firing rockets into Israel, and it has conveniently ignored the trigger that Israel caused by launching a raid at the Al Aqsa Mosque. See, many countries which are very close to Israel, they have supported Israel's position. And recently, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted, which included national flags of 25 countries, which have given complete support to the Israeli position that violence began in the Gaza Strip and it was Hamas which triggered the violence. Interestingly, in this tweet, the Indian flag was missing, thereby clearly indicating that India doesn't support this stand taken by Benjamin Netanyahu. This stand of India has been made clear by India's permanent representative to the UN because India has clearly pointed out that violence began in East Jerusalem and the trigger to all these clashes was the raid carried out by Israeli security forces against the Al Aqsa Mosque. This position of India clearly shows that India stands on the side of justice without getting caught into the geopolitics involving the Israel Palestine issue. Next, in the same statement, India went on to condemn all violence that happened at Haram-e Sharif or also the Temple Mount, both of which are sacred religious shrines for the Muslims and the Jews. Now, the mention of both the names for this sacred site is very, very important because Palestinians, they only consider the name Haram-e Sharif, and it is within this compound that the sacred Al Aqsa Mosque is located. The Palestinian Muslims and many Arab countries, they don't give legitimacy to Temple Mount, which is a sacred religious shrine for the Jews. The Jews of Israel in turn do the same by failing to recognize the sanctity of Haram-e Sharif and by failing to respect the sentiments of the Muslims towards the Al Aqsa Mosque. They only give legitimacy to Temple Mount and the Wailing Wall, which is the sacred religious shrines for the Jews. So, in this conflict over religious shrines in Jerusalem, India has clearly taken a middle path by recognizing the historical and cultural significance of Jerusalem. And in its statements, India has referred to these sacred places both with its Arabic name and Jewish name, thereby clearly recognizing that the holy sites in East Jerusalem belongs to all faiths and not to any particular faith. Because at the end of the day, Jerusalem is the place where all the Abrahamic religions were born, and it is equally important to the Jews, to the Muslims, and to the Christians. This is yet another consistent standard position that India has maintained over the years, irrespective of the party which is in power. Next, another key point highlighted by India's permanent representative is that India has taken into account the trigger caused by Israel by trying to evict Arab families from two neighborhoods of Jerusalem, that is Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan. In these neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, Arab families, that is Palestinian Arabs, have been settled from decades together. But recently, Israel has been making illegal attempts to push illegal settlers into the area, And through legal cases and through the judiciary, it has been trying to snatch away these land rights. And through court orders, it has been trying to evict Arab families, which has been correctly read by India as a grave provocation by Israel. So India's statements at the UN make it very clear that with regard to the latest clashes, the trigger came from Israel, the provocation came from Israel. That is exactly what India's statements have done by recognizing that the violence began in East Jerusalem and not in the Gaza Strip. And the trigger was the raiding of the Al Aqsa Mosque by the Israeli security forces. And the tensions were built up with attempted eviction of Arab families from Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan. But we should also take note that while India has supported the creation of Palestine and while India has given complete support to the two-state solution, it has dropped any reference to East Jerusalem and it does not make any mention of specific recognized borders. Then, along with that, India has condemned the violence carried out by Hamas, and India has criticized Hamas for firing rockets indiscriminately from the Gaza Strip towards the civilian areas of Israel. But at the same time, India does not take note of the disproportionate force being used by Israel. And this again possibly indicates a change in position of India in favor of Israel. Because as I mentioned earlier, in the past, India would often condemn Israel for using disproportionate force, while criticizing Hamas as well. And at the UN, India has often voted against Israel for using excessive force and for violating the human rights of Palestinians. But now this position seems to be changing because India has restricted its criticism just to the Hamas and its use of violence, whereas India makes no mention of the disproportionate force being used by Israel. So, in conclusion, what you can see is that an evolution of India's policy towards the Israel Palestine issue, where India has been trying to retain certain core principles and traditional doctrines, and accordingly, the Modi government as well has continued the previous policy of supporting the Palestinian cause and of giving complete Indian diplomatic support to the implementation of the two-state solution. Plus, India has again taken a right stand by correctly identifying the triggers and the grave provocations which led to the latest rounds of clashes and violence. But however, when it comes to its criticism of Israel, India has softened its position, most likely by keeping in mind the strategic security and defense relations between the two countries. Next, on page number 1, we have an article which refers to Cyclone Taukte, which made landfall today. See, in case of a tropical cyclone, a landfall is an event when the storm enters land or moves over land. So the time and place of the cyclone's entry over land marks the landfall event. And this is accompanied with very high speed winds and torrential rains, which causes a massive disaster in the coastal areas. So Cyclone Taukte, which formed over a low pressure depression region near the Lakshadweep Islands, intensified into an extremely severe cyclonic storm. And as it passed parallel to India's west coast, it has caused enormous damage to Kerala, Karnataka, and Maharashtra before finally making landfall in Gujarat, leaving behind a trail of destruction in the coastal areas. So, this brings us to the question, are cyclones intensifying more in the Arabian Sea? Because generally, we always hear more about cyclones in the Bay of Bengal causing massive damage. In the Bay of Bengal, it's a very common occurrence that every year there's going to be multiple cyclones before the monsoon season and after the monsoon season. And these tropical cyclones that form in the Bay of Bengal, they intensify into very severe cyclonic storms or extremely severe cyclonic storms. And they are known to cause immense damage to the east coast of India and as well as to neighboring Bangladesh and Myanmar. States on the east coast, particularly Odisha, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, and even Andhra Pradesh, are known to be severely hit by these cyclones that form in the Bay of Bengal. But until a few years ago, it was quite rare to witness a high intensity cyclone in the Arabian Sea, even though cyclonic circulations were happening and even though low pressure systems were developing. But in the last few years, it has been clearly observed that the cyclones that form in the Arabian Sea are intensifying more. And in the last few years, we have witnessed high intensity cyclone formation in the Arabian Sea as well, such as Cyclone Meg of 2015, then Cyclone Mekkanu of 2018, which struck Oman, and Cyclone Vayu of 2019 and Cyclone Okchi of 2017, which caused massive destruction along the west coast of India as well. So the question is, why are cyclones intensifying in the Arabian Sea, which is usually a phenomena associated with the Bay of Bengal? To answer this question, we need to understand the mechanics of a tropical cyclone. See, tropical cyclones require a constant supply of energy to sustain themselves. Once a low pressure region is formed around a depression, this low pressure system starts driving itself through a constant supply of warm water and humid air, which is supplied readily by the sea surface. So, if the sea surface is warm enough, water evaporates, thereby providing enough moisture which will sustain the cyclone. The more the heat released through condensation of water vapor, the steeper will be the drop in pressure, and such a low pressure system undergoes multiple stages of intensification to form these high intensity cyclones. So, when the water is warm enough and when there is a constant supply of energy, the cyclones easily intensify further, thereby causing massive damage upon landfall. Typically, tropical cyclones in the North Indian Ocean region, that is both in Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, they develop during the pre-monsoon and as well as during the post-monsoon periods. The pre-monsoon cyclones are witnessed between May and June, whereas the post-monsoon cyclones are witnessed between October to November. While cyclones and low depression areas are known to form in both the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal during these seasons, it is usually just Bay of Bengal which was witnessing intensification, whereas the Arabian Sea was not so known for highly destructive cyclones. In fact, on an average, every year, 5 cyclones are formed in the North Indian Ocean region, and out of them, 4 occur in the Bay of Bengal, and all of them they gain significant strength and intensify into a severe cyclone. Whereas hardly one cyclone used to occur in the Arabian Sea with very limited intensification. In the past, even if such a cyclone in the Arabian Sea intensified, it would usually curve towards the Middle East and it was usually striking Oman or Yemen. But of late, especially over the last 6 to 7 years, meteorologists and climatologists have been observing a clear trend in the Arabian Sea, wherein global warming is directly contributing to rising sea surface temperatures of the Arabian Sea, thereby leading to higher intensification of these cyclones. See, in the Bay of Bengal, it's much more easier for the cyclones to intensify because the water surface is much warmer. Compared to the Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal is always known to be more warm because there is a constant supply of fresh water, and this doesn't allow the cold water below to rise up, and as a result at the top surface you will always find a constant supply of warm water. Plus, the shape and the geography of Bay of Bengal is such that it imports cyclones from the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean, and all these factors combined together were contributing to the formation of more cyclones in the Bay of Bengal with higher intensification. But in the Arabian Sea, very little fresh water mixes, and hence the water was relatively less warm as compared to the Bay of Bengal. So even though low depression areas were forming in the Arabian Sea, they usually wouldn't intensify, and even if they intensified, they would curve towards the Middle East. But now global warming and rising sea temperatures are changing the dynamics of cyclone formation in the Arabian Sea, and the rising sea surface temperature in the Arabian Sea is providing constant energy to these cyclones, leading to its intensification, which eventually travel along India's coastline, finally striking Maharashtra or Gujarat. And of course, even states such as Kerala and Karnataka and the state of Goa along the west coast are severely affected by these cyclones. Next, we have few more articles related to this disaster on page number 5 and as well as on page number 8. And both the articles make a reference to India's immediate responders who have been providing HADR assistance to the victims who have been affected by the cyclone. HADR stands for Humanitarian Assistance and Disaster Relief. And during times of disasters, the nodal agencies designated to respond are the NDRF, the National Disaster Response Force, accompanied with the SDRF, the State Disaster Response Force, with the support of the armed forces such as the Navy, the Coast Guard, and of course the Indian Air Force. Depending on the disaster, even the Indian Army would be deployed. But for this cyclone, the NDRF, Navy, and Coast Guard and the Indian Air Force have been playing a key role over the last few days in rushing assistance to the affected areas and in carrying out search and rescue operations to rescue those who have been stranded in the Arabian Sea. So, according to this article, the Indian Coast Guard has rescued several fishermen who were stranded in the Arabian Sea, and the Indian Navy as well has been carrying out similar operations, and several naval ships were kept on standby to rush immediate aid and relief material to the affected areas. Then the Indian Air Force has been helping out the NDRF in transporting the required logistics, and NDRF battalions that specialize in cyclone management had already been deployed along the west coast of India. Now let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question: the casual resort by the police to the sedition clause continues to cause concern. Critically evaluate. The second question: during a discussion at the UNSC on the latest Israel Palestine clashes, India, as a non permanent member, reaffirmed its support for Palestine but stopped short of making any direct reference to the status of Jerusalem or the future of Israel Palestine borders. Does this indicate that India's Palestine policy is evolving? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So, this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.